Most of us want life to give us a straight path to our dream life. But real life doesn't work that way. It gives us choices. And sometimes those choices don't lead where we planned. They lead to where we need to go next. Today, I'll share my experience of what it actually feels like to stand at a fork in the road when nothing is fully clear yet. By the time we're done, I'll give you a way to take that next step even before the whole road becomes visible.
Welcome to the Live Right Now podcast with me, Allan. This is where mindfulness meets everyday life. Thanks for joining me for this reflection on living with intention. Let's talk about how we can live right now.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Allan, and welcome to Live Right Now. Yogi Berra once said, "When you see a fork in the road, take it." Now, it sounds like a joke until you're actually standing at one. Then it starts to feel a little less like a punchline and more like honest advice. Most of us want the path to be clear before we take a step, but clarity doesn't usually work that way. What I've learned the hard way is that clarity tends to show up after you move, not before. And that's what this episode is all about. Have you ever been unemployed? I don't mean that moment when the job says you don't work here anymore. I mean that point after months of sending applications, months of near misses, where you're afraid to get excited about a promising call, where opportunities are just one step away, and looking for a job is your full-time unemployment. It's not glamorous. It's a grind. I've been there recently. I've talked about it a few times on this podcast. My job search lasted 235 days, 249 if you count the time till I actually start my new job. But it ended in a way that I never expected. I was at the end of my unemployment benefits, just 1 week left before filing my final voucher, when a former colleague, someone I'd worked with years earlier, suggested something that I hadn't seriously considered: a major pivot. A different industry entirely, a long way from the career that I'd spent years building. Now, my first instinct was resistance. This wasn't my field. This wasn't how I saw myself. I'd built an identity in broadcasting, and that identity ran deep. But I took the next step. I listened. And something shifted. Not because I was desperate, but because what he was describing made more sense than I thought it would. To be honest, I was still applying elsewhere at the same time, still interviewing, still moving on multiple paths at once. Nothing was settled. The decision wasn't between clarity and confusion. I'd come to diverging paths with equally uncertain destinations. And while I was standing at that fork in the road, I realized that no matter which direction I took, I was going to have to change how I see myself. Slowly, I began to loosen my grip on the story that I'd been telling myself about who I was, and I became open to going in a direction that I hadn't planned. And I came to realize that isn't failure. It's the thing the struggle was producing all along. Most of us think resilience means refusing to change, but that's not resilience, that's stubbornness. Real resilience is what happens when you find yourself under enough pressure that you finally let go of the version of yourself that you've been protecting. Not because you gave up, but because you grew. We tend to think of identity as something fixed, something that we should build and protect because it feels like knowing who you are. But identity isn't a structure. It's a direction. And directions can change without erasing where you've been. The experiences that shape you don't disappear because you take a new path. They come with you. You just stop insisting that the next chapter has to look like the last one. Letting go of who you were isn't a loss. Sometimes it's how you find out who you actually are. But even once you've chosen a new direction, that doesn't erase the weight of what you feel you're leaving behind. Because this wasn't just about opportunity, it was about identity. For a long time, I understood myself through broadcasting, not just as a job, but as a framework for who I was and how I worked. That identity isn't instantly replaced. You feel the absence of it before you fully understand what comes next. Anticipating that absence was part of the hesitation of changing direction. There's a kind of identity lag that happens. The part of you that can see new possibility tends to arrive later than the part of you still anchored to your past. You resist things not because they don't fit who you are, but because they don't fit who you remember being. But something interesting happens when you talk to other people during those moments. They don't always see what you think you're losing. People I trusted started saying the same thing in different ways, that this kind of pivot made sense, that the direction I was considering actually aligned with strengths I already had: leadership, communication, stability under pressure, the ability to guide people and navigate complexity. They weren't describing a departure from who I was. They were describing an extension of it. Because looking from the outside, sometimes people can see your potential more clearly than you can from inside it. Sometimes we define ourselves too narrowly based on where we've been and not on where we could go. At the time I wrote something publicly, it was a way for me to share my frustration and my resolve. I wrote 220 days, over 7 months. That's how long I've been looking for a job. Not because I wanted to, because regardless of how valuable I was told I had been to the company, I had become expendable. I knew at an academic level we all are. I never thought it would happen to me. Am I scared? You bet. Am I giving up? Hell no. I'll keep going to day 222 and 23 and 24 as long as I need to, because I have to. Stopping is not a choice. Is my future determined? No, but I am. It turned out that I needed to keep going to day 235, so I had to live those words for 2 more weeks after writing them. The declaration wasn't the end of the hard part. It was still the middle. Remember those choose your own adventure books? Every kid did the same thing. Stuck a finger in the page they were leaving, just in case. Because when the stakes are low, keeping your options open feels safe. But real choices don't work that way. They're not always safe. You don't get a bookmark. You pick a direction and you live it. And we spend a lot of energy trying to make irreversible decisions feel reversible, keeping one foot out, hedging, waiting for more information before we commit to what's already in front of us. But here's what the bookmark actually costs you: presence. When you're always half ready to go back, you're never fully here. The weight of a real choice, the fact that it counts, that it's yours, that you can't unmake it, that's not the scary part. That's the part that makes it mean something. Put the bookmark down. Turn the page. Turning the page fully is what finally makes things clearer. Not before the decision, because of it. On day 235, at the end of the week that I got my final unemployment check, the offer came, and I accepted. And in that moment, there were still other possibilities still on the table. Directions that would have looked more like my past, but they were still possibilities, not certainties. And after all that time, I had a different relationship with certainty. I recognized a bird in the hand when I was finally holding one. Now, I want to be honest, I didn't take this new direction because I had a revelation. I took it because the timing was right. The opportunity was real. And someone who knew me well had been pointing toward it for years. And I finally had enough distance from my old identity to hear what he was saying. Now, this is going to be an identity shift. I know that. But now that I'm open to seeing it in a new way, I realize that this is a new way for me to use my communication and leadership skills. It's a new opportunity for me to contribute in a meaningful way to something that matters. The years I spent in broadcasting, building skills, building relationships, building a way of working, none of that disappeared. One of those relationships is exactly what led me here, and everything I built is coming with me. I just stopped insisting the next chapter had to have the same title as the last one. We think clarity is what makes a decision possible. But most of the time, the decision is what makes clarity possible. We want to see where the fork in the road goes before we take it. But we can't know until we take the first steps. The path ahead rarely becomes visible before you choose it. It becomes visible because you choose it, because you started moving, because you were willing to take a step before you could see the whole road. We want to think life is a map where every route is visible before we choose. But it's more like walking in fog. You only see enough for the next step once you take it. Stop waiting for the fog to lift and start walking. So how do we take that first step when we're stuck deciding whether to turn left or right and we can't know where either direction takes us? Now, I've lived long enough to know that this is not a question that life only asks us once. But we can be better prepared to face these choices if we can let go of certainty and open ourselves to possibility. If you're in the middle of your own stretch of uncertainty, your own day 221, here's the most practical thing I can offer. Stop asking, is this the ideal path? And start asking, is this a real step I can actually take today? That shift moves you from evaluation to motion. And motion is where clarity lives. Oh, and pay attention to the people around you, not just the ones who will encourage you, but the ones who will be honest with you. And ask them this question. What do you see in me that I might be overlooking? Then, listen to the answer, whatever it may be. What they say might be something they've been trying to tell you for a long time. The fork in the road doesn't always come with a sign. Sometimes it looks like a problem. Sometimes it looks like an ending. Sometimes it looks like a friend saying, have you ever considered? You won't always recognize it when it arrives, but when you do, take it. Thanks for spending some time thinking about this with me today. Until next time, stop waiting to choose a direction. Take the next step, and remember to live right now.
Thanks for being part of Live Right Now. If you like what you've heard, I encourage you to like and follow the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Join the conversation on our Facebook page or email me your thoughts at the address in the show notes. I'm Allan Haw. Until next time, make the most of every moment and remember to live right now.